As part of Troy University's Ambassador-in-Residence program, Ambassador Connie Morella spoke to Troy faculty members and students in April 2016. In addition to her ambassadorship to the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, Morella represented Maryland's 8th Congressional District in the United States House of Representatives from 1987 to 2003. In this speaking engagement on the Troy campus, Morella discussed her experience in the House and the legislative process.
Well, I'm Connie Morella, and I approve this message. That's something you're going to hear a lot more of. You already have been hearing it during this very critical time, so I am particularly pleased to have the message to say thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to see all the wonderful things that Troy University is doing. I didn't know you had 76 countries that are represented here. I didn't realize all the online programs that you have, what you do for the military, what you do for the students who are here in the various programs. I learn more about it every hour that I'm here. So I'm pleased to be here. I enjoyed very much, I must say, Dr. Harrington's introduction was so very lavish. It reminded me of something that had been attributed to Mae West many years ago. She said, "Too much of a good thing can be downright enjoyable." So thank you. Very, very effusive and really very kind of you. Dr. Harrington has been escorting me around doing a really great job, and we've had Dr. Davis, Dr. Todd Hammer, and I must say, as I would call him, Dr. Michael, who is our expert on Russia.
I don't blame you for.
I mean, I just thought if I ruin it, it's not worth it, because I think he's so great. But everybody has been so terrific to me, and I appreciate it very much. I'm reminded, Joseph Addison once said, "A human soul without education is like marble in the quarry. None of its inherent beauties come out until the skill of the polisher takes it and makes it shine and brings out every ornamental vein and cloud that runs through it." I say this to you because I really think your professors, your administration, and your staff really are the polishers of the marble. And you students are the marble. And so you're being polished to go off. And what my hope is that in your careers, as you become leaders, that you have a part of it that deals with public service, international service, and maybe running for office and holding an elective office. Because we need you very much. Now, I thought that I would kind of take as my thrust my own personal and political, obviously, journey to show you transitions, to show you trends, you know, like in the olden days, what it was like. And so I think I will start off by asking you to raise your hand if you have a credit card that is in your name. Do you have a credit card in your name? I think just about everybody's hand went up. But you know, in 1972, when I first got involved in politics, a woman could not have a credit card in her own name unless she had a male sign for her. Therefore, just think, it kept her from housing, it kept her from entrepreneurship, it kept her from kind of the independence that a person would want. And so it wasn't until the Equal Credit Act was passed in 1974 that could happen. So I want to point out to you the things that we take for granted were not always there. It might also be that as a female, you wanted a job and you applied and you were almost accepted until you read the fine print. The fine print, which might not have even been so fine, said that if you were to have a child, you were to terminate, the job would be terminated, or in some instances, if you were to have a child, you wouldn't even be hired. And it wasn't until the Pregnancy Discrimination Act passed that was changed. So you see, we take these things for granted, but there was a need for attention and there was a need for legislation to bring about some of the changes that we just plain take for granted. Okay, how did I go tripping into politics? Well, frankly, my friends, I started off teaching at a community college. I liked it very much. And at the same time, around 1970, there was a woman in Congress named Martha Griffiths. She was from the state of Michigan. She introduced the Equal Rights Amendment, which would be a constitutional amendment. Well, you know, for an equal right, for any kind of an amendment, as you know, and we have, what, like 26 amendments, for any amendment, you have to have it go through Congress, signed by the president, and then it goes out to the states. And you need to get 38 states to approve of it. So it's no easy task. She got it out of Congress. Now, she got it out of Congress despite the fact that there was a tyrant. In that issue, he was a tyrant. Emanuel Seller, a man from New York who chaired the Judiciary Committee, where that bill had to come out. She was able to get the bill on the floor of the House by something called a discharge petition. Now, I don't know whether you've looked into that part of politics in terms of that procedure. Discharge petition means that you could have a piece of legislation that would not go to a committee, would go right to the floor of the House for all the members to vote on, if you got 51% of the members to sign it, sign that petition. That's not easy. Now, you say something like Equal Rights Amendment. First of all, if you were to sign on, you alienate the chairman of the committee where you have other pieces of legislation you want to have come out. You alienate people who are your colleagues who are maybe of a different party and disagree with you. We don't need this kind of thing. But she did it. And so I mention her name because I commend her for the fact that she did succeed. It actually got through the Senate. It went to the president's desk. And in 1972, who was president? A man named Richard Nixon. And Richard Nixon signed that Equal Rights Amendment. P.S. He also signed the amendment, the Title IX that you know full well because it deals with higher education and discrimination. And we always looked at it like women in sports. You know, in 1924, the first Olympics, women could engage in only one sport. What do you think it was? Ice skating, ice skating. Right now, I understand that your women's basketball team are going into the NCAA. That would not have happened years ago had you not had that. Incidentally, Title IX is now also interpreted with regard to sex abuse, particularly in higher education on campuses. So there's much more attention being given to that because of that. So I mentioned that there are legislation that is important. So how did I get involved? Got involved because with Martha Griffith's Equal Rights Amendment, there was an attention paid to setting up commissions for women throughout the states. And so I was on the first commission for women in my state. And so we lobbied our state legislators to pass this amendment because it had to pass the state legislature. In so doing, I looked around and noted that there really was a need for equity in all areas. In employment, it's hard for you to realize, but the employment wasn't done via the internet. It was done in newspapers where you saw the want ads. The want ads were one section for women and one section for men. So a woman could be maybe a rural school teacher, maybe a nurse, maybe a secretary, but she couldn't really be that doctor, the engineer, the scientist, the entrepreneur who was the CEO, et cetera. And so you also learned in education. You couldn't be a Rhodes Scholar if you were a woman and you weren't a president of a university. Just think now. You have MIT, headed by a woman, Harvard, headed by a woman. And I could go on with the litany of how things have changed since the 70s. So I point out to you when people forget to look back at the past, I think it's important as an inspiration to look at what it was like then. And so affirmative action plans began to be instigated, and I was very much involved in that on the Commission for Women. As a matter of fact, an example of a difference is our Bethesda Chevy Chase Rescue Squad, one of the best known in the country, would not allow women, and yet they wanted to expand, they needed to expand, and so on behalf of the Commission for Women, I testified against it, and I said, you know, not until you accept women should you be given the permit to build. And we succeeded. They allowed women, and right now, there is a woman who is the president of it. And she is, also went to American University, Washington College of Law. And they have a predominance of women. So the point is, you just needed to point out this is what needs to be done. Okay, why? You can see it's a natural connection. I then thought, if I want to continue with the work of enhancing our society by giving opportunities to women, because that's what it does, it enhances our society, I should run for office. I should have a seat at the table. If I don't, I might be on the menu. Think about it. So I ran for office. That was in 1974. I got to tell you, in 1974, there was something called Watergate. You know what Watergate was? Anybody? Watergate was a stupid shenanigans of a paranoid president who did so many other, Nixon, who did so many other good things, like opening the door to China. EPA, Clean Water Act, signing Title IX, signing the ERA. But he was paranoid with regard to the Watergate and the tapes that he had. So, and Ford pardoned him then. Remember, he left office and he was going to be impeached, and Ford, who then became president when he resigned, Ford pardoned him. What it did to Ford, I'm giving you a little history lesson. What it did for Ford is it prevented him from being elected president, but yet he did it for the country. And in the long run, when you look at history, you can see the benefit of what President Ford had done. Okay, ergo, why do I bring this up? Because I ran in a predominantly Democratic area, it still is, predominantly, and I went out and I knocked on doors. You know, and I would get questions like, do you believe in the double standard? Oh, well, of course not. I know. Well, they didn't mean the male-female double standard in employment. They meant Nixon and Watergate. And so I lost. I lost my first election, and I was the closest loser, but it doesn't matter. You either win or you lose. And most of the Republicans, none of them were elected or re-elected at that time. Why do I care about bringing this up at Troy University? Because I think it's important. I think it's important for you all, male and female, to realize you're not going to win them all. And you've got to get back there and pitch and run again and do it again and not give up and take chances. And so often, particularly females, will say, oh no, I didn't make it that time, I won't go back again. You're never going to succeed if you don't. And when I think about it, Obama lost an election, Clinton lost an election, Bush lost an election, Lincoln lost an election, well, Reagan lost. They all lost elections, but they all went back, and they ultimately won. And I went back too. And so that's made all the difference. I went back and I topped the ticket the next time I ran. And so I served in the state legislature for 8 years. At that time, I guess the point I'll bring out, I was on the Appropriations Committee, and I was on the subcommittee on law enforcement and transportation. And I remember we used to meet more often than other committees, driving on the highway, Route 40 to Annapolis on a Tuesday. I was stopped by a police officer. And he didn't say a word. He did say, he said, show me your license. So I gave him the license. Didn't say a word. I said, oh, officer, if I was speeding, I'm sorry. No cars were on the road. Didn't say a word, and started writing down. And he wrote down Maryland House of Delegates, which is what our legislature was called, District 16, which was the district I lived in, House of Delegates. And he came back, and he handed me the ticket. Well, I looked at it, and it was a warning. It was not a ticket. I thank you, officer. I really appreciate that, and if I was exceeding the speed limit, I won't do it again. And then he spoke, and he said, I didn't do it for you, I did it for your husband, the delegate. That really happened. Well, you know, I also have an adage, which is time wounds, all heals. And I went to my Annapolis subcommittee of law enforcement and transportation, and there was a superintendent of the Maryland police pleading for his budget. And so it was a great opportunity to explain the experience I had just had and how the officer handled it. And so he apologized, oh, I'm so sorry that happened. And so my colleagues on the committee said, well, we should make sure this doesn't happen again. So we actually had put in, it wasn't so much a bill, it was the budget, put in his part of the budget. an affirmation that there would be proper personnel treatment with regard to the sexes. And so we accomplished something as a result of that. Now, I don't think that would happen today because you'll find more women who are in legislatures, and you'll find more women who are in boardrooms, not enough, but there may be still a little bit of that happens. The fact that if someone is an ambassador, I mean, years ago, when I first became an ambassador, we'd go in a receiving line at an embassy in another country, and so you're then introduced. My husband was often the handshake went out for the ambassador, and he would delight in saying, no, she is the ambassador. He would emphasize that and kind of, grin like, you better start catching on to something. Okay, so after that I decided I can talk about state legislatures if you want in your Q&A about how I think they're great experimental opportunities for federal legislation. But then I ran for Congress. I was not expected to win. My opponent had the most expensive losing race in the country at that time. And I think it was a people thing that helped to promote my candidacy. Again, I knocked on all those doors. My kids would say, elect our mother and get her off the streets. And yeah, even to today, like 30 years later, people still remember, you came to my house. So you can't beat, and I say this to you for every ramification, you can't beat the personal touch. You find even wherever you go, the personal touch, the thank you, the kindness. People remember that. I used to even do metro stations, shake hands as they're getting on. And my staff got a call once, I would like to have the Congresswoman officiate at my wedding. And she said, but she doesn't have that authority, And how do you know her? I met her at the metro station and she seemed like a nice lady. So, personality, I think, does help the caring, the touching of the people. So I did win. We did have a Congressional Caucus for women's issues. Why do I point that out? Because it's a nice kind of opportunity, but when people get together, whether it's organization for sports or just a community kind of thing, but it was very important that the women have some place where they could talk to each other and be sort of a support network. When I was elected, there were 24 women in the House of Representatives, and it was like 50-50 Democrats, Republicans. Now we have 80 in the House and 20 in the Senate, and it's like 2/3 Democrats and 1/3 Republican, the number of women. I think this is 2016. This is the 100th anniversary of the first woman elected to Congress, Jeannette Rankin, Montana. But women couldn't vote in 1916. How could she have been elected? That's because election laws very often are state laws. So you had a handful of states that at that time allowed women to vote, Montana being one of them. What I find interesting is, because I kind of looked into this, and that it was those western states that allowed women to vote, and they never seemed like progressive states to me, but they allowed women to vote, and one of the reasons was they wanted to get more women to move into the territories. Women weren't moving in, and they needed the women. So they said, all right, let's give them the right to vote, because maybe that'll lure them in. Jeannette Rankin, who became the first woman, she was there during the First World War. And she voted against the First World War. She was not the only one who did, but she voted against it. And the press was not always very, very good. And even though they had the one woman, they wrote about her and they said, with tears in her eyes. Now this is before John Boehner, who made crying for men to be okay. But with tears in her eyes, she voted against it. An interesting connection with Jeannette Rankin is that she later ran for the Senate and she didn't win. And then she became involved in public service pretty much. And she then ran for the House again, and she won again. She was there for the Second World War. So here's a woman who served both World Wars, and at that time, she was the only vote against the Second World War. I find that kind of interesting history. And so 24 women in the House when I was elected in 1986, and 2 women in the Senate. The 2 women in the Senate were Barbara Mikulski, who just now is leaving Congress, and Nancy Landon Kasbaum Baker, who later married Howard Baker. And one was a Democrat, and one was a Republican. So in forming that kind of coalition or caucus, the caucus had been started a few years earlier. It was a good opportunity for women to come together to talk about legislation or just plain get to know each other, which I think is so very important. What were some of the accomplishments? Well, there were many accomplishments because women care about all issues. And I was on the science committee, and I had all of my laboratories, National Institutes of Health, National Institute of Standards and Technology, Food and Drug Administration, and what used to be the Walter Reed National Naval Medical, it's now the Medical Center, not Naval anymore. Walter Reed Center. So all of these were part of my jurisdiction. So obviously I served on the committees that helped them and that followed them, as well as federal employees. I had obviously a lot of federal employees, but I always felt that some of the issues that seemed to affect more women, that women should be in the lead. I mean, after all, because sometimes when I'd knock on doors too, someone would say, "Are you running as a woman?" I thought, well, I don't know that I have any alternative. Yeah. What are some of the accomplishments I might point out? I guess I'm very proud of the Violence Against Women Act in 1994 was signed into law. It took a lot of years to get it going because it was the most landmark piece of legislation in that area. 1994, Violence Against Women, VAWA, V-A-W-A. And actually there are people from other countries that come over here through the State Department, and we sometimes go over to visit them, who all want to know, how did you do it? What did you have in it? Because it seems to me we are cognizant of the fact that so many countries have the need for legislation that is implemented, that would deal with that dirty little secret that had been hidden under the rug. We need to pull it out, and we did. We had an online call line for calls. We had safe havens. We had training, judicial training. We had training for the police also. We had a lot of other grants that went out to different communities for different things. Yeah, the hotline, around-the-clock hotline. So there were a lot of things done, and every 5 years it was to be reintroduced. In 2000, I was the key person, the lead sponsor on it, and we added trafficking, human trafficking was added in the year 2000. And with human trafficking, we get a report annually from other countries. So some of the countries represented here, they could check and they could find out what their country has done in terms of the report on human trafficking. We have it in the United States too. We're not immune from it too. And so the last time the Violence Against Women Act was passed was 2013. They had trouble with it then because they included the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual part of it, and that caused some controversy in Congress. But it did pass. It was very important that it passed. Prior to that, with the reauthorizations, it had included immigrant women. Prior to that, it had included date rape and stalking. So it became, so that is something that was a big achievement. Was it done by women? Not only, of course not. I mean, let's be pragmatic. If you're talking about women, whether it's 24 or whether it went up to 1992 was the year of the woman, and then they added 24 new women at that time, and people say, how did that happen? It was sort of like Anita Hill had kind of brought that along a little bit. But whatever your number is, you don't have enough to pass legislation, so you depend on the guys. And the guys became good supporters. You say to them, hey, you've got a girlfriend, you got a mother. You got a cousin, you got a daughter, you got a wife. And this is what your constituents want. That's what it's all about, serving the constituents. And if you get your non-governmental organizations, groups, student groups, other groups, to rein in with their members of Congress, that makes a difference. I must say, over in the Senate, a man who has said the most important thing he did was violence against women was Joe Biden. Joe Biden, even now if you ask Joe Biden about that, he'll say it was violence against women. He was very good. Also, Orrin Hatch came over to the House to talk to the Republicans and say, you guys should pass this. This is important legislation. So what you do is what you do. You try to muster up your support from always. We finally ended up getting a medical community, and we got jobs. We got we got corporations, because if you have a Violence Against Women Act to prevent it, to indicate that it's a crime, then you're going to have less absenteeism, and you're going to have more productivity. So you can point out the benefits of this kind of thing. And of course, kids, you know, the children who see their father beating their mother or whatever. So that was an accomplishment. I'll point out another one that particularly affected women. But again, remember I say, every time you talk about women, you're talking about society. You're talking about everybody. And that is, having represented the National Institutes of Health premier medical facility, there was a report that had been done. And as we looked at the report, it said that women were not being included in the clinical trials and protocols. Well, they weren't? Why not? Well, I don't know, whatever they maybe thought, hormonal thing, they were afraid they'd ruin something, whatever. So, Pat Schroeder and I, Democrat and Republican, Olympia Snow and Barbara Mikulski, Democrat and Republican, got together and we asked for a meeting at NIH. So we went to NIH and they had like, I forget how many institutes there are of it, but the institutes were all represented around a long oval table, and they each had like, each institute director had like 2 packets in front of him, and there were a couple of hers. And one was, this is what we've done for women. The other packet was, this is what we're going to do for women. So we got all the promises, and that was lovely. Bill Robb was the acting director at that time. But you can't rely on just promises. You need to have something to implement it. So we had it put into a piece of legislation which became the NIH Revitalization Act, that there would be an Office of Research on Women's Health. Women were considered little men. Women were not even, the experiments that were done on animals, like rats, were not even done with female rats or animals. They were done only with the male animals. And I like to say there is a male gene and a female gene. But there's not a Democratic gene or a Republican gene. So it truly is nonpartisan. Well, we succeeded. It's made all the difference. Following Dr. Robb was Bernadine Healy. You may have heard about her. She was the first woman director of the National Institutes of Health. All the differences that have been made in terms of autoimmune diseases, HIV, AIDS, Lyme's disease, hormonal treatments, all of these came about because of that. And they're still working on doing more, getting more concern to follow through to make sure these things are happening. There are plenty of other things that have come about that we're very proud of that I would point out. But you know, I also found that as we went on, the Congress seemed to be moving a little bit more to the right, and then a little bit more to the right. And that was something I began to say, what in heavens has caused that? And what can we do about it? Well, I think what caused that is the fact that you had redistricting that was taking place. What is redistricting? Redistricting is something that's done every 10 years. You have a census. It is mandated in the Constitution. There'll be a census where all the people will be counted. From that, you can make determinations about a lot of things, where you need educational facilities, where where companies would like to join in and start enterprises there. But also, it's done in order to look at your congressional and your legislative districts to make sure they have equal numbers, that they're fair, and you have an opportunity to then draw the lines of those districts. Who does the drawing of the lines? In 90% of our 50 states, it's done by the legislators, the state legislators, and the governor. Okay, so when you're drawing the lines, if you are a Democratic governor and you have a Democratic legislature, you want to preserve the seats of your Democratic members. So you're a little bit more artistic than would pass any kind of a test when you draw those particular lines. If you're a Republican governor and you have a Republican legislature, you're going to do the same thing. I mean, this is not just one party and not the other party. Both parties are guilty of it. My state of Maryland, which is a very blue state, as you know, has one of the districts, it's the 3rd district of Maryland, which is the 2nd worst in the country out of 435. It goes into 5 different regions. Number 1 is some district in South Carolina. I don't know anything about it, but I know ours is number 2 out of all of them in being so badly done. And this is called gerrymandering. And gerrymandering is not brand new. Gerrymandering started with a man in Massachusetts named Governor Gerry. Governor Gerry was designing a district in Massachusetts, and it was designed like a salamander. And that's how they got the word gerrymander. In fact, Governor Gerry is buried at Congressional Cemetery. I've seen his grave in Washington, D.C. But it just got worse. And I think the one man, one vote enhanced it. It's gotten so bad that it is polarized. So you have the red and the blue, and you don't really have the purple, kind of the coming together. You also had, along with all of the other things that happened, you also had too much money, too much time spent raising money. The average is that a member of Congress, and I think they're all elected because they want to serve their country and they want to serve their constituents, I really mean that. They all plan to do that, but things happen where it doesn't come about. For instance, with money, they spend about 30% of the day now is spent raising money. That's 30% of the time that could be spent legislatively. It's 30% of the time that could be spent visiting with constituents, going to various events, et cetera. And it is raising money not only for their own campaigns, it's raising for their party. And it's become so that a list is given to Democrats to go to the DNC, Democratic National Committee, and raise this money. Given to Republicans, go to the Republican National Committee office, which is, both of them are near the Capitol, and raise your money. And then they will print or put a poster or a picture or in some way indicate how much money you've raised. And it may be that there's a task force you're interested in or some item in the legislature and the appropriations bill you might be interested in. You just might not get it if you have not done your part in raising the money. Do the politicians like it? They don't. They hate it. But they're all doing it, and they're doing it to survive. And with this gerrymandering, you are losing your competitive districts. Because if you're gerrymandering, you have a safe Republican district. Who votes in that district? Oh yeah, Republicans vote in that district. Primary voters, and this I say to you young people, voting in a primary is critically important because they're the ones, particularly in the safe district, that make the difference. They're the election. They are the election. In my state of Maryland, April 26th is our primary. I'm a Republican. I haven't changed party. I can't even vote. in that primary, I mean, I can vote for a Republican, but I know that the Democrat's going to win. And so I can voice how I feel, but I can't vote. So what we need is people have got to vote in primaries. Maybe you should give them something. Maybe there should be a lottery for voting, but they should vote in primaries because it's critically important. Secondly, linked up to that in terms of the reforms I'm suggesting, open primaries. Some states have open primaries. I don't think you do here in Alabama. What is an open primary? You do?
It's open.
It is open? So that would mean that a Republican could say, I want a Democratic ballot. It's not the case in Maryland. It's not the case in most states. It should be. I'm glad Alabama has it, yeah. Even though you have all these amendments to your Constitution. that almost makes up for it. So you do need to have an open primary to give everybody. For instance, in Maryland, if you are an independent, you can't even vote in a primary because, you know, what ballot do you ask for? There is no independent ballot, you know. So I'm glad you have an open primary and voting in primaries, as well as commissions for redistricting. My governor is a Republican governor for the first time in many years, and he has come out with a resolution for the state legislature to approve to set up a nonpartisan commission for redistricting. And boy, are we hearing little comments from the state legislators saying, oh, it's not necessary. We have to wait for the federal government to do it. Or we can handle it in different ways. We don't need to set up a commission. Well, I'm sure if it were a Republican state, it would be the same thing. So it's not going to get any place unless the public say to their legislators, darn it, you promised you were going to do this, you should do it. When I say promise, the League of Women Voters actually put out a report. Not a report, they put out a tabloid before the last election where they had asked questions of the candidates, and that was one of the questions they asked. And so there should be a follow-up. If these people said, yes, they thought there should be some commission, hold them to it. Say, well, aren't you going to vote for it? You said you would. Otherwise, we'll do something to let the press know about it. Okay, so open primaries, the redistricting bit. These poor members of Congress go home on Thursday, come back Monday night or Tuesday morning. This Congress is only going to have 69 days in session. The lowest I think it's ever been. So we need to do something, get them to stay in Congress and to get to know each other. That is a big point for me. When you know somebody, you can disagree with them, but you listen to them and you get along with them. And it's just much easier when you know them. I think what Congress needs is to get more times where they have bipartisan events where they are forced to sit with each other, not one side and the other side, forced to sit with each other, where they have events where they bring their families so they get to know each other as human beings and know something about their background and be able to work together that way. So I think, again, if they could do something like 3 weeks in Congress, there, and 1 week back in the Congressional district, if they do more traveling together, actually I think members of Congress need to go around the world to learn about what's happening in other countries. You do that right here at Troy. And I think this is what they need. They need to know, get beyond their sphere. And I think that could make a difference. I was very lucky being in Congress, but when I said I'd talk about millstones and milestones, I was there for 9/11. I was there for a government shutdown. Remember, I represent all these federal employees that then was exacerbated by a snowstorm. I was there for the wall coming down, the Berlin Wall coming down, the devastation of the Soviet Union. There have been so many other, the impeachment, the Iraq War. So I have been very fortunate to have been kind of involved and intricately and intimately involved with these kinds of issues. And what I say to you is it's very important that you get involved. A book that was recently written, like Running from Office, is a study of millennials, indicating that millennials are not interested in running for office. They feel they just don't want to get into the fray, that there'll be something else they'll do in the private sector, but not running for office or public service. Well, we need you. You're our future. I mean, we have to get you involved, and you can make a difference. In all kinds of, anything I've mentioned to you, there are remedies or ways that we can make a difference. I then said I would talk briefly about OECD. I was very lucky to be able to go from the Congress to OECD, came from the Marshall Plan. George Marshall talked about a family of nations in 1947 at Harvard, and that's made all the difference. What we did is we gave expertise and some money to 16 European countries to get themselves together, pull themselves together. The beauty of the Marshall Plan is that we did not dictate to these countries what they should do. We said, you know what you need, infrastructure, education, whatever it might be. We're going to give you expertise and we'll give you money, and you can do it. And so when people say we need a Marshall Plan, that's really what they're talking about, the fact that we don't dictate, but we are there to help, and it made a big difference. It became the Organization for European Economic Cooperation, and then in 1961 it expanded to include Asia, the Asian nations like New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Korea, et cetera, and North America, Canada, the United States, and Mexico. But what's so unique about it is it levels the playing field. I mean, Tom Friedman may have said, the world is flat. Oh yeah, Tommy, it's got a lot of bumps. And so the OECD tries to flatten, to level make sure that the laws of the United States, like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, are enforced throughout Europe so that we can do business there, which became our anti-bribery convention. They work by consensus, and that's the point I want to bring out. You know what consensus means? That the 34 countries have to all agree. That means you've got to get to know them, know your ambassadors. You've got to talk to them about how their country feels. You've got to find out about what your country wants and work that way. As an ambassador, you don't do what I did in Congress, which was I acted independently, remembering, I cared about the budget and whatever. You do not freelance as an ambassador. You follow the dictates of you are representing the country, not yourself as an individual, but you do the very best you can. But that idea of consensus is a point I want to bring out, and that is that to work together, you have to respect, listen, learn, and lead. And so I say to you, my friends, I hope that's what you will do in everything that you pursue. I like the quote of Admiral Grace Hopper. Grace Hopper, she was quite an IT person, when she said, a ship in port is safe, but that's not what ships are for. Sail on. So I hope you will sail on beyond Troy University. And thank you very much. Thank you.